Okay. All right, with that said, we'll have ourselves a little review. What do you think? Now, for those of you that like these, the entire test is going to be multiple choice tomorrow. 30 multiple choice questions. And I will tell you today what you need to know and what you should know to be successful on this, okay? And everybody looks at me like, really?
Is this going to be recorded?
Yep, it's recording as we speak. Okay, first of all, you will need to know what country controlled Vietnam before the United States got involved. And that country was? France. Very good, France. So what country controlled Vietnam prior to us getting involved? You need to know that. Next thing you need to know is, just listen to me before you panic. What was the result of the international agreement after France left? In other words, this is what you need to know. North Vietnam, communist control, Hanoi, capital city, Ho Chi Minh, leader. South Vietnam, non-communist, Saigon, capital city, Ngo Dinh Diem as their leader. You need to be able to separate their political affiliation, their capital city, and who the leader was in each of those two countries. Okay? Now remember, this is multiple choice. So you're not going to have to write anything down. You're going to have to recognize, okay, and read. Okay? All right. Also, it'd be important that you know when the South Vietnamese military was considering a coup against Diem, what important Americans supported or didn't support? Did McNamara support the coup? Did Rusk support the coup? Did Robert Kennedy support the coup? Did Henry Cabot Lodge support the coup? All those important players, Maxwell Taylor, what were their viewpoints on whether the United States should support that coup or not? Yeah. Some supported, some didn't. But Kennedy ended up going with it under the condition that they exile Diem, not kill him, which they didn't do. Okay? But there was a lot of important players there. Bobby Kennedy, Dean Rusk, McNamara, Maxwell Taylor, Henry Cabot Lodge, etc. Who supported the coup and who did not support the coup. Okay, you need to know who made this statement to President Kennedy about Vietnam. It's a quagmire. If you go in with an army, you'll never get out. Who made that comment to President Kennedy? Mike Mansfield, Senator Mike Mansfield. Very good. You need to know that. You also need to know the two United States senators that voted against the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. The two United States senators that voted against the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. You also need to know what napalm was and what it did. And also what Agent Orange was and what it did. In other words, the differences between the two. Napalm and Agent Orange. Another good thing to know would be several examples of terrorism that were used by North Vietnamese guerrillas during the Vietnam War. Several examples of terrorism that were used by the North Vietnamese guerrillas during the Vietnam War. Bombing babies, bombs in streets, bombs in marketplaces, nightclubs, sending soldiers' private parts home, that type of stuff. Now, this might seem a little cumbersome, but you need to know it. You need to know the exact American that I gave you, the exact American casualties by the end of 1965. How many wounded, how many killed? American casualties by the end of 65, and by the end of 66, and by the end of 67. Three separate questions. I'm looking for American casualties, killed or wounded by the end of 1965, American casualties killed or wounded by the end of 1966, and American casualties killed or wounded by the end of 1967.
So those are combined, right?
They're in three separate questions.
Yeah, the casualties
Well, it might say so many were wounded, so many killed. Okay. Okay. I also gave you several examples of why 1967 was a tough year for the United States in Vietnam. For example, what was the war costing us a day? $1 million. So you're going to need to know several examples of why 1967 was a tough year for the United States and Vietnam. Also, we told you that 1967 television was covering the war nightly, right? What percent of a newscast was devoted to Vietnam? 90. And how many million Americans were watching nightly? 50. So 50 million Americans watched, and 90% of the news related to the Vietnam War. Also, during the Tet Offensive, I need to know the 3 specific areas that the Viet Cong stormed or attacked. Do you remember what they were? 40 South Vietnamese cities and towns, 12 United States military bases, and even what? U.S. Embassy in Saigon. Yep. So know those 3 areas that were attacked during the Tet Offensive by the Viet Cong. Also, I would know statistics concerning the first 48 hours of fighting during the Tet Offensive. You know, how many Americans were killed, how many soldiers were wounded. Was the first 48 hours broadcast on TV back to the United States? Yes, those types of things. Okay, perfect. Concerning the battle at Khe Sanh, I would know how long it lasted, how many Americans were killed, how many wounded, what were the statistics on North Vietnamese soldiers killed, that type of thing. Remember what percent of the 84,000 were killed? 70%. Might have to do a little math. Let's see. I would also know what happened after the Tet Offensive. This concerning Walter Cronkite and Robert McNamara. What did Robert McNamara do after the Tet Offensive? He resigned. What did Walter Cronkite do after the Tet Offensive? He broadcast his opinion that, you know, what the hell's going on here? The best we're going to get is a stalemate. We got to negotiate. Okay, those types of things. I would know what happened during the student siege of Columbia University in New York City. What did happen?
Students broke into the president's
They took over the President Grayson Kirk's office. They held 3 faculty hostage and seized 5 other buildings. Okay, very good, very good. I would know who the first man to challenge President Johnson for the Democratic Party nomination was. Who was that? Eugene McCarthy, very good. I would also know who President Johnson called into the Oval Office to discuss the possibility of sending 206,000 additional troops to Vietnam. Mike Mansfield, very good. And I would also know by April 1st of 1968 what President Johnson's approval rating was. Anybody remember that? 36%, very good. All right, I would know that the peace talks between North Vietnam and South Vietnam began in May of 1968, but I would more know how many years after they began did the war continue. 5 more years, yeah, 5 more years. What were the 2 states that Robert Kennedy had just won in the Democratic primary prior to his assassination? South Dakota and California. Very good. I would know who William Wessel was. Who was William Wessel? You saw him yesterday in the video.
Is it one? He's the man that got shot while reporting.
He was a news reporter that got shot and while reporting, and actually gave a broadcast back to the news station while he was laying wounded. That was interesting yesterday because you could see the blood all over his shirt, and he sat there giving a broadcast back. That was kind of interesting. I would know the aftermath of the shooting of Senator Kennedy. Like, what happened? How many other people were wounded? Okay. Who was Elizabeth Stevens wounded? Was Rosie Greer wounded? Frank Mankiewicz? Billy Bob? I know the people that were wounded during that time. Not a lot of detail, just who they were. Who were the people wounded during the Robert Kennedy shooting? I'd also know who was with Senator Kennedy at the time of his death.
The dishwasher.
I mean, when he actually died in the hospital. Who was with him when he died in the hospital? Okay, Ethel was there. Okay, I'm talking about family.
Where's Jackie?
His sister, Mrs. Stephen Smith, Jackie, Ted. Okay, you're pretty good with those. Rose Kennedy there? No. Was Jean Ann Kennedy Smith there? Yes. Was Edward Kennedy there? Yes. Was Kathleen Kennedy there? No. How about Stephen Smith? Mrs. Kennedy's husband, was he there? No. Patricia Kennedy Lawford there? Yes. Find out. Rosemary Kennedy there?
No.
Okay. Jackie Kennedy?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I want you to know, and you don't have to write it down because it's multiple choice. What was Senator Kennedy's ending statement in his eulogy for Robert Kennedy? What did he say? Some men see things as they are and say why. I dream things that never were and say why not. Now, I'm not going to put 4 different ones. Some dudes see things as they aren't, and I mean, it'll be pretty specific. There'll be 4 different quotes. You need to pick. You need to pick the one he said, but they won't be make-offs. They will be 4 quotes, but not make-offs of the same quote. Okay?
This one has a
Yeah. That, all right. What things changed politically after the assassination of Robert Kennedy? Democratic Party failed in their, that hurt the Democratic Party. The point is the Democratic Party chance of winning was diminished tremendously because they couldn't get a good candidate. Secret Service protection for political candidates. After the assassination, a 24-year-old Palestinian by the name of Sirhan Sirhan was arrested, was he not? So anything that happened after the assassination, be paying attention to that. And then you're going to need to know each of those 6 astronauts I talked about today and what happened to them or what they were doing. I might say, who was the command module pilot for Apollo 8? Who would that have been? Command module pilot.
Jim Lovell.
Jim Lovell, etc. Who was Roger Chaffee? He was one of the astronauts killed in Apollo 1. Okay? All right, there will be 30 answers. They'll be worth 4 points apiece, and it'll be worth 120 tomorrow, kiddos.
Okay, Mr. Jordan.
Yep.